Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today is my guest again is Matt Anderson in our series on how to think about marketing. And today we get into the psychological profile of the prospect, the customer that we're trying to reach, the who. So we talk about why those things are important. We talk about reaching emotional triggers to figure out what their beliefs are, what their fears are, what their problems are, and being able to talk about them and helping the entrepreneur understand how to get out of their own way, to be able to reach them and stop thinking about things from our own knowledge. So we have this curse of our own knowledge and our own perspective. And sometimes that gets in the way of how our customer, how our prospects think about what we sell. And we get into that to dive into how we fix that for our own self. So go grab a cocktail, go grab a cigar, strap in for another impactful episode of Sales and Cigars. So, Matt, welcome back to Sales and Cigars, How to Think About Marketing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we try to jam a lot into these conversations. We're trying to add value to the entrepreneurs and business owners that are out there. So what I want to try to do is do a quick summary of some of the things that we discussed. I would encourage, if this is the first one we've hit, to go back and listen to some of the other conversations with Matt, because that'll be really, really helpful. Because what we're doing is building a marketing house. We're building it from the ground up so that it's got a strong foundation with the right pieces there.
My goal for these conversations is that we, provide a pretty good introduction to how to think about marketing for people who aren't marketers, sales guys like yourself, entrepreneurs.
We're guys who get in our own way, and we've talked about what that looks like. We've talked a little bit about how agencies sometimes, they might be trying to fit us into a certain peg that they want us to go to, and we don't help them because we have a particular peg in our head that we think we should do. I know I've done that in various thinking, wasn't open to ideas. If we pick up from where we were, I'll tee this up and then you fill in where I missed. Yeah. But we were talking about the who of our customer, which is something that if you get that wrong, you're doomed. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I think one of the reasons why people often don't get the quality of marketing work they want from the agencies they engage or from their internal marketing team is that they haven't done the strategic work first to kind of clarify what their message is. And as we said, the message, is, who is your ideal customer? What are you selling? Why would they want it? And a variety of other questions like that. And then there's this kind of core sort of set of stories that you then build on. And then, once you have the core ideas that you need to persuade your customer of in order to get them to buy, then your marketers are equipped to go and find creative ways to put that in front of your audience and to make it really super engaging and exciting and, really make that message sparkle. But if you don't first know what to buy your product, your marketers probably aren't going to figure out how to sell it.
And if I'm remember correctly, we referred to it as a psychological profile.
Yeah.
And we talked about a different way of going about it. It wasn't the old style of figuring out their income and where they lived and what they bought. It's a little bit deeper than that. And I think we talked about the problems that customer has, their fears, their wants and desires, their beliefs, right? About not just about life in general, but their beliefs about what you're selling, the beliefs about what they think about your product, your service, your offering. And I think you gave me some homework to do there, which I did. So what did I miss in that?
Good. Marketing always starts with who you're talking to. And that psychological profile really lays out the architecture of the triggers that you have available. When you can trigger certain things psychologically and affect their emotions, that's when you can really start to change their minds and get underneath their current resistance and actually move them in the direction you want them to go in order to buy.
When we line that up with, because there's a parallel there with sales,
Yes.
right? That we're not trying to get somebody to buy our product. We're trying to help them if we're
Yes.
doing it right.
Right.
And we don't do that logically. We talk to them about their challenges, their issues, their problems, try to figure out if they're big enough and compelling enough for them to do something about it. Um, and then we're really looking for that emotion that's
Right.
going to drive those decisions that need to be made to move forward, because there's always roadblocks and challenges. So,
Right. In the business to business sales world you're operating in, the job of marketing is to grab your customers' attention, educate them about the product and the problem and all of that, kind of prepare the ground, and then entice them to become a lead. And then you, in sales, you have an advantage that we marketers don't have. You get to talk to the buyer face to face. You get to ask them questions and adapt your responses based on what they tell you. When
but
it comes to marketing, though, we need to kind of make our message resistant to all the variety across the ideal customer.
and the
Uh,
noise.
that's where this psychological profile really comes in. You want to, and like we said last time, the biggest problem that clients often have, from my perspective, is that they see the world from their perspective. The curse of knowledge makes it impossible to not know what it's like, before you knew the things you knew, right? And so the input that we often get from our clients on the marketing side is so wedded to their perspective that it often will not resonate with the customer.
Yep.
And
And
so what we coached people to do last time was to actually do some research. We talked about places they can find the voice of the customer, places like reviews of your competitors, your own customer reviews, reviews on Amazon of books, your category. Like for you, it would be sales training books and sales manuals. In my world, it would be marketing books, questions on forums like Reddit or Quora, things like that. And when you go through a bunch of that material, you'll often come up with themes that really start to detail what your customers are really thinking about and in the words that they use. And so I think you did some of that homework.
I did, and I think that to do it, I thought I was going to spend like 20, 30 minutes
Yeah.
and be done. And the one day I just kind of like, all right, I'm going to go look at, I was going to try to look at Google reviews, right? Which
Yep.
was a little harder than I thought it was going to be. But I went down a couple rabbit holes, and it was like an hour and 20 minutes later, I look up and realize, holy crap. I mean, I got a lot of information,
Yeah.
but it just, you kind of keep going, and you catalog all of this, and then you pull it back, and then you got to start to think about those threads. And I think that's what we're going to talk about here. How you go, all of those sites that you mentioned are great. There's lots of information. It's sorting it. But I think you start there. This is what I learned. You got to be clear about who it is who's in your space that you're trying to learn about and
Yeah.
understand those customers. Start with yourself,
Right.
and then go to the people that you bump into a lot out there as competitors, and then the people that are tangentially around that maybe have a slightly different offering. So I kind of widened it, and then had some concentric circles that
Yes.
came out. But what was interesting is what I found was what you said, that you're going to see these themes or these threads that drive through it. And I was surprised that there was some commonality throughout the
Yeah.
the
So
data.
when I do work like that, I'll have one screen with the websites that I'm looking at for customer sentiment, and then I'll have another screen with a spreadsheet open, and I'll be adding, I'll just be copying and pasting as I go, sentences or phrases or even complete reviews that I think are helpful. And I might end up like you say, you think it's going to take a few minutes, but it ends up taking hours. But at the end of it, I might have 100, 150, 200 different observations, that might be phrased slightly differently, but then I'll go back through and I'll start to group them, and you start to see the themes emerge.
Yep.
And then I'll also have another tab open for like particular phrases that really sparkle, that like just hit you like, wow, that customer really nailed that particular feeling, or that feels like it's something that really got to the core of it, right? And a good indication for reviews that might contain that, like on Reddit or on Amazon, where other people can upvote useful reviews. The ones with the most upvotes are usually very dense with the kind of information that gives you a clue to customer sentiment.
No, that's exactly what I found. And when you start to go through that, so I didn't use a spreadsheet. I was using OneNote as my
Yeah, yeah,
way to
that one too.
capture things, right? So when you step back after you've done some copy and pasting, like I had pages of data.
Yeah,
If I had turned it into a Word document, there would have been 9, 10, 12 pages of data that just kind of was all there. And then you look at it and like, oh, that's I hear that a lot. I see that.
yeah,
And the idea of looking for something with a little sparkle, those should jump out at you.
yeah,
Um, that so I think the exercise took longer than I anticipated, but I thought it was the value that came out of it made me think about, oh, that's a different perspective than mine, which is
yeah,
what I think what your goal was.
yeah,
To
exactly.
think differently.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
which is
you'd recommend that our listeners, if they haven't done that homework, that they go back and do that.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the effort, and it's not worth delegating.
Yes.
I mean, if you got a really good person to delegate it to, and you've explained really what you're looking for, maybe doing some of it yourself is really critical, especially if you're struggling with the marketing messaging.
Yeah.
This is going to help bring you some perspective on that who.
Yeah.
Um,
If I were to delegate it, what I would do, and I've had like interns help me with an exercise like this, what I have them do is I have them copy and paste the entire reviews and then highlight what stands out to them. And that'll give you a pretty good clue quickly whether they really understand what to look for or not. And if what they've highlighted makes sense, then you can have them go back in and sort it into a spreadsheet and stuff
well,
like that. But being able to read the comments in context will educate you in ways that I think you're going to find are surprising.
yeah, I think the value gained, value earned on the time is definitely there, and it's not something that you have to do business hours, right? This
Right.
stuff is available. Like honestly, Matt, there was one time I woke up at 3:30 in the morning and I couldn't get myself back to sleep, so I
Yeah.
started just
Yeah.
poking around.
It's
There's
not a
no,
high intensity exercise, but it's a high value exercise.
it is.
So I
Um,
think what we were going to cover today then is, well, you've got that, all this stuff. What do you do with it? And so what I think we could do is we can kind of walk through the process, maybe take a couple of the insights you found, and then walk through kind of back and forth how we can turn that into the start of a customer profile.
okay.
And then we can talk a little bit about, how to use that to inform, your marketing efforts.
So where would you recommend we start? Just kind of looking at me, see identifying some threads.
Yeah, let's take for instance, what's the first thread that comes out in your research?
The fact that the customer, the client felt like everything was customized to
Okay, so
their
that's
need.
something that they liked about the service they received.
That's one thing that I saw repeatedly.
Yeah,
That the there was a breadth of services, and that they felt that everything was dialed into their particular situation.
yeah, that's great. And so I think that's a really interesting one to start with, because it shows how we can start to build out each element of that profile from an insight like that. So, like we said, our triggers that we can use to grab customers' attention and persuade them to buy. start with their problems or fears, right? So if we look at customization, what's one way to phrase that as a problem?
I think the takeaway I had was that they were afraid that organization was going to get them to do something that they do with everybody,
Right.
and they're unique. The client was unique, and that they had special problems that
Right. So,
nobody else had.
maybe the problem is, sales training programs haven't worked for me because they're not customized to my needs.
Now, is that a problem or a belief?
Well, I mean, everything is perception, right? So every problem is really a belief about a problem, right? And every desire is a belief, has a belief embedded within it that if I, you know, add $100,000 a year to my income, life will be better. That's a belief behind that stands behind the desires to add $100,000 in income this year.
So all of those problems, fears, wants, desires, beliefs, they're really like a Venn diagram, right? Where there's sort of
Yeah.
overlap between everything.
Well, yeah, they do often overlap, right? Um, and so, like, sometimes a desire can also be phrased as a problem, right? And then there's a belief that stands behind it. So some of this is going to be what's the most useful way to describe the point, or where does the same insight become a new one, right?
So
And
this is, but being clear that how you're going to talk about the belief or the problem becomes how you tell the story, right? There can be
yeah,
overlap, but that's
so
what's going to drive the story.
right. So to illustrate the point, if we take this thing about customization, this idea about customization, we phrase it as a problem. Most sales solutions don't work because they don't fit our particular needs, right?
Mhm.
The next component of the problem, and where the real meat is well, what are the symptoms of that, right? And when we talk about symptoms, like the old commercial, for the flu medicine, right? Scratchy eyes, itchy nose, scratchy throat, runny eyes. Those are the symptoms that tell you have the flu, right? Well, what are the symptoms that tell you that what you've been trying isn't customized to your situation?
That there's no adoption. That it doesn't feel
Yeah,
right. I mean,
I give my salespeople training and they don't use any of it. The sales training it tells them to ask special, these particular questions, but those questions aren't relevant to my customers, right? That might be another symptom.
yep.
Uh, and, if you were to go back to all your research, you're probably going to see people telling little stories like that of cases where, they tried something and it just didn't work in their business.
There were a couple of instances where this was the first time we worked with someone who felt like understood our particular problem, right?
Yeah.
And that they adjusted to come to where we were, right?
Yeah,
Is
like it's something like they kept telling stories about selling software, and we sell hardware, and it's not at all relevant. Um,
exactly.
they're always trying, they're trying to train me on asking questions about their business processes when in our world we sell commodities and it comes down to price and deliverability.
Right.
And
How do you
so
differentiate the
yeah,
commodity?
yeah. Um, and maybe another symptom of it needs to be customized is my salespeople tuned out. It started checking out 15 minutes in because none of the stories were relevant.
Right.
Those are examples, right, of how you then can start to build that out. Of okay, you have a single problem, but where the real meat is, where you get a variety of marketing ideas from, is what are the symptoms that indicate you have that problem. And then closely related to that is how does that problem make your customers feel, right? Speaking to someone who's frustrated, or speaking to someone about things that frustrate them is different than speaking to someone about problems that make them afraid, that terrify them,
Yeah.
right? Um, and when we talk about creating your message or creating your marketing strategy, those provide clues to both you and your marketers what kinds of stories you need to tell that are appropriate to, that particular profile.
So I mean, we talked about one thread that I found,
Yeah.
and the depth and the complexity of that is not something that someone that's a business owner, the entrepreneur that's an expert that has this perspective is you really need some help. You really need to, you can read books and start to open up your mind and come to this, but having a conversation with somebody like you is going to um, open up the right messaging. But I think the practical nature of what we're talking about here is that by doing the work, by doing this research, that it helped me understand what their problems were, what they really believe, right? What they're afraid of. Because one of the other threads was we didn't and it's related, but they would talk about ROI,
Yeah.
right? And it like the sales training didn't, the development work didn't give us an ROI. We didn't
Right.
get the revenue growth. So they talked about revenue growth
Yeah.
from a positive perspective and a negative perspective.
Yeah. So,
Is
the
what you were
problem
talking
there,
about before.
yeah, the problem there is probably like we don't have enough sales, right? That's driving the need for sales training. And, a symptom might be my team keeps missing their targets, and, their projections aren't believable, and, things like that.
They're
Right.
always
But
wrong.
on the positive side, revenue growth probably has a really positive picture, right? And there's, a mental image attached with that corresponds to what they really desire. You know, what does that mean? Well, they probably want to get customers with regularity. They want to, be able to accurately project what their sales are going to be next quarter and next year. When they
They
need
want,
to fund new initiatives, they want to be able to reliably pull that sales lever and get more sales.
they want to be able to turn the spigot on by
Yeah.
pulling the right levers, as you say, that feed the top of the funnel. And I think this is where we talked about the advantage of a salesperson has with being able to have a conversation, engage, right, and go
Right.
back and forth, where marketing is more speaking broadly to a group of people. And I think the thing that's becoming more, making sales more like marketing, is that salespeople are coming into the sales cycle later than we used to. So the analogy I always use is like car dealers,
Yeah.
right? You had to go to the dealership to learn about the new car,
Right.
right? You had to go see if it had cup holders or what the engine looked like, how comfortable it was. You can now do all of that without entering in and talking to. You can go buy the car without the salesperson.
Yes.
Um, so in those transactional type things, those are becoming way deeper. But even with a complex sale, we're coming in later. We're invited in later because
Yeah.
they've gained more information from marketing, from digital components. So that's another component here that we'll talk about later in the series. But that's why this marketing has to be congruent.
Right. Are
Otherwise,
you familiar with Oren Klaff? He's
yeah, the
yeah,
the
sales author and financial. He does
the
fundraising deals.
yeah,
Event.
he helps people go raise money by telling them the magical story you tell to the VC guy.
Yeah. So in his book, Flip the Script, right? The introduction is people hate to be sold to, right? They don't like to be convinced, but they sure like to buy, right? And I think what you're describing is today more than ever, buyers are in charge.
To a much larger, a much greater extent than they used to be. He had a great line in his first book where he would be in that pitch mode where it's like, that big problem that we have, everybody has, and it hasn't been solved. We figured it out. So if that's how you open your, your pitch deck to the money people, you have their attention.
Yes.
Now you have to deliver, but
Right.
you have attention.
Right. So these things, like, right, the problems, the fears, the desires, um, are, like I said, they're hooks into that story. Even when buyers are in charge, those are the the tools that you have to begin to shift their momentum in your direction. And so you're right that it's a lot easier. You're going to get further faster working with someone to help draw that out of you. It's great to do the research yourself, right? To get in the mind of the customer. But as you can see, even interacting here for just a couple of minutes on a couple of these threads, we've been able to spin out a number of insights that can begin to inform your marketing and begin to take you further. But if you're not going to work with someone like me, then I do think this is work you can do yourself. And just having this framework, having these questions, what is the problem? How do I summarize it? What are the symptoms of the problem? How do those symptoms make me feel?
Absolutely.
Will give you a lot of new ideas.
At minimum, it opens your mind to seeing a different perspective. It takes you out of your chair and walks you across the room. It's like, oh, wow, you're the fly on the wall.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like.
Yes.
I felt like this little guy over here listening to what was being said. It's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Oh.
Yeah, the internet's an amazing place. It lets you eavesdrop on all sorts of people.
But if you pay attention to it, it brings you a perspective. And sure, you can go deeper and you start to change your perspective. But I think for me, it opened up my mind a little bit more because I've gone through the facilitation. It really helped me focus on like, oh, they care about these things, they care about this thing, they care about that thing. Like those are real.
Yeah.
And whether you need help or not, you get farther along.
Right. Yeah,
Does
definitely.
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And that's been my experience with every client I've worked with. Now, we haven't talked too much about that third kind of leg of the customer profile stool, right? The common beliefs. And, to refresh people's memory, the idea here is that your customers have beliefs about the world and about what you're selling and about what you say to them that will condition how they perceive everything you do. And from a marketing perspective, let me start first from a sales perspective. Those are often where your objections come from, right? And so, that might be a place to start in listing out these common beliefs. What common objections do you run into? But from a marketing perspective, often those common beliefs are even broader. But those beliefs are often really fertile ground for indicating kind of what the core elements of your message need to be. What would be a common belief that you ran into?
Sales training doesn't work.
Yeah, sales training doesn't work. I'm sure that, people who've tried 2 or 3 sales programs and never seen results, they probably believe that sales training doesn't work. It's really helpful to lay out what that belief is. And then if you can, to identify why you think they have that belief. What are the reasons they give for why sales training doesn't work? And what experiences did they have that convinced them of it?
They've, in some cases, they've spent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they didn't move the needle. There was a blip. There was a bump in like excitement, but it didn't last, right? And that leads to the belief that it doesn't work. And this, I'll just take this one step further.
Yeah.
In my humble opinion, I agree that it doesn't work. Now, there's other things that we can address, other beliefs that need to be, and other problems that could be corrected. And I think that's what makes for an interesting conversation. Maybe that's the next one we do. Next conversation we have is about how we address that, where you tie those beliefs to the objections that people hear. Yep. Is that a way to go with this?
Well, we could certainly do that. So I guess what we could do is we can, now that we've kind of described how to build out that psychological profile, what we can do next time is we can talk about how to use that profile to begin reverse engineering what your messages need to say.
I love that. I think that it's that old, what is it, radio or television thing where you tease them on this idea, right? Where, and that's what we're trying to do here is walk people through a framework, and they'll get some of it. Some of it that will make sense. Some of it they'll struggle. They can always pick up the phone or shoot you a note and ask questions. But we're helping them see. In one sense, we're poking holes in things that they believe, right? That maybe changes their perspective. But we're at the same time we're helping them like, but this is how you can use this information, right? I did the research. Okay, now I had a bunch of information, and then now we're talking about how we can use that data to craft it in a way that we all can relate to.
Yeah.
Right? That's the next piece.
Yeah, and maybe to help people understand how this all fits in with our overall goal of helping people like yourself, as a sales expert, understand marketing in a different way, right? Not because you're going to create your marketing, but because if you don't understand marketing, you're going to have a hard time working with marketers to get the marketing you need, right? And so what every kind of marketing needs to do is three things. Has to attract attention, needs to have a selling story that persuades people to buy, and then it needs to call them to take the next action, right? This three-part structure, hook, story, offer. Well, that's also the three-part structure of every ad. Every ad needs a headline that grabs attention. Or if it's on Facebook, an image or a video that grabs attention. It needs to have a story that builds persuasion and makes the customer desire what you're trying to sell. And then it has to call them to action and convince them to buy. Well, every paragraph within that ad needs to retain attention, needs to pay off that attention, and then needs to build to the next paragraph. That three-part structure is everywhere. Now, what we've been talking about, the psychological profile, that is where most of the meat is in your message for attracting attention. Right?
And I think that's a critical point for everybody to grasp. If they take nothing else away from this, 30-minute conversation, is that if this is critical to build out everything else, to get the messaging right, if you don't understand the who, you don't understand their fears, you don't understand their problems, you don't understand their common beliefs and what they really, really want, then there's no way to speak to them in an emotional fashion to get them to get their attention, to get them to listen to your story, or get them to take any kind of action at all.
Yeah. If you can give your marketers nothing more but that psychological profile, I can virtually guarantee the ads they create after they get that psychological profile are going to be 3 to 5 times more effective than the ads they were creating before. It is amazing how often insights from just doing the work that we've described are the key, that the lever that kind of cracks the safe and creates ads that are many, many times more effective than any ads you were running before.
I mean, ads, the words that are used in emails, the copy that we put together from a sales perspective, the story we tell.
Sure, it will make your sales presentations better. It will make your website immensely better. Everything gets better.
Your offers will be better.
Yeah. We'll in a few episodes from now, we'll get into offer engineering, and we'll go back to the psychological profile and show how you can kind of build out much more irresistible offers with the information that your research uncovered.
I love it. All right. So again, I did the homework. I really think it's something that, as an entrepreneur, business owner, it's worth going out, spending some time on those sites, Quora, Reddit, Amazon, Google. There's some other sites that are sponsored on Google that has tons of information. They have perspective, so be cautious of what their perspective is, and even go read your own Glassdoor reviews to understand what your own people think about that, because that's illuminating. When we work with somebody on a recruitment basis, like, what's your Glassdoor rating? And like, what are you talking about? Right? They've never even heard of it. So go out and that will give you perspective on internally how well, because that's part of the deal. Internally, your messaging, and if you're not helping people understand what you're trying to get them to do, you're gonna struggle there too. So, any last insight that we should instill upon the folks before our next episode?
No, I think this is a good place to leave it. I'd just reiterate that the real meat, where your new insights are going to come from, aren't just in your summaries of the threads that you see in your research, but it's then in the questions you ask yourself to probe deeper and identify, okay, well, what are those symptoms of the problem? What does revenue growth look like to them? What is that picture in their mind? Can I infer from what they said what they're actually thinking and feeling about that? And then, with those common beliefs, experientially, how did they form those beliefs, right? Because that's what you really hook into. It's one thing to say, you probably think that sales training doesn't work for you, right? It's another thing to say, I've spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars on sales training and didn't get an extra dollar of sales out, right? And knowing that that's what you're going up against will really be useful when it comes to what we talk about next, which is, well, what does your message really need to be in order to prepare your customer to buy?
Yeah, and how do you want to approach all that? I mean, there's some nuance in here. So, but tying those symptoms to the psychological profile, and really digging in, talking to your customers is something that we probably should also mention. Go
Yes.
talk to your customers and ask them these questions and understand. Right? Some of it might be uncomfortable, but it will be illuminating, and you will be better off, and the relationship will be stronger because you ask those questions.
Yes.
And
And I would say the one reason why I didn't mention talking to customers is that in my experience, you're going to get a much more unvarnished opinion if you have a third party do that work.
yeah,
And I've developed a process and very different kinds of questions than most research firms use that are really aimed at getting underneath, at both triggering the customer that you talk to remember the specific experiences which cause them to form their conclusions, and then asking questions with special trigger words that get them to tell you psychologically what's going on inside the mind.
yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of neurolinguistic programming that goes into formulating those questions correctly. But
Yep.
when you do, it's amazing what pours out. And so, that's work, that a benefit of working with someone like me is that, when it's appropriate, we can do some of that work to really improve your marketing quickly.
Yeah, because the questions in sales the questions are what make us smart, gives us credibility. It's not telling them or doing demos.
No.
It's asking the right questions to make them think differently.
And even the difference between one word and another will completely change the answer you get.
Yep. And doing it because you can literally go ask questions in a political survey to get people to answer a question in a particular way,
Totally.
right? And we want unvarnished answers, as you say,
Right.
honesty. So, all right, let's let it land it there. I'm looking forward to the next conversation. And if people have a question in between here, I encourage you to reach out to Matt. We'll have all of the website and the email in the show notes. So go ask the question, and because you're open to spending a few minutes with somebody to dig in a little bit.
Yeah, if you can't wait for the next episode, or you really, see how this work can, take your marketing to the next level, help you attract the leads that you want, and improve your sales process at the same time, please feel free to reach out. It's, I'm at Zegio Marketing Solutions. Find me online or in the show notes, and I'd be happy to chat with you.
All right, awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate it as always.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. Looking forward to the next time.